Okay, this video is a book review. Here's the book Dominion. Here's a picture of the cover of it. This guy right here is the author. His name is Tom Holland. He's writes from England. And there's some good things about him. He's a smart guy. His heart's in the right place. He's praising Christianity. What he basically says is when he was a young man, he was a big fan of the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans because they were so strong and powerful and impressive as they were so aggressive and whatnot. And that then as he got older, moving into middle age, he noticed that the Greeks and especially the Romans were very brutal, okay? Brutal beyond what modern people understand today. And he realized more and more, he thought that the Christian worldview and attitude about life was better. Christianity doesn't force people to be good. People are going to be bad if they want to be bad, but it reminds everybody they should be good. They should be nice. They should think about the other person, give them a chance, forgive. So it does lots of good things. So don't get me wrong, humans will never be perfect, but Christianity tells them they're supposed to be as good as they can be, try to be like Christ. So that's all good. Here, let me get to the next slide here. Here's some things about Rome that, not everybody knows how brutal Rome was. There was a slave revolt, and then Crassus, one of the rich guys, part of the triumvirate, with Julius Caesar and Pompey, he took the slaves and he would crucify them along the Appian Way, the road into Rome, every 100 yards or so. This picture has them all closer together for effect, but he would crucify them all the way through. We got another picture of that. So here they are, just all crucified on the way to Appian Way. So any slave would see that, and they would see that it's a bad idea to revolt, okay? But what I'm trying to say is this is sort of typical of the brutality of Rome, okay? And a really good book, really good movie was Quo Vadis, which is, from the question St. Peter had asked the Lord, Quo Vadis Domini, where are you going, Lord? When he saw the Lord walking with the crucifix on his shoulder into Rome as he was exiting, fleeing the persecution of Rome, of Christians in Rome by Nero, around 63 AD. So that book is great about contrasting the goodness of the Christians compared to the brutality of the Romans. Okay, it's a magnificent book, one of the greatest books of all time, Quo Vadis by Henry Sienkiewicz. Okay, so anyways, as he was getting older, Tom Holland was sort of realizing these things. And here, for example, is Julius Caesar after he conquered Gaul. So Julius Caesar, wanted to be the greatest general in the history of the world, and up to his time, he pretty much was. Alexander the Great was his role model, okay? And so he conquered Gaul. He killed about 1 million people from Gaul, and he really had no qualms about it. Tortured them, do all kinds of brutal things to them. And he's just like, hey, you're from Gaul, I'm from Rome. Gaul is inferior, therefore, you get what you deserve unless you surrender to me. So he's just absolutely brutal. And in Rome, sort of valued strength. It did not value kindness, mercy, forgiveness, weakness, none of those things, okay? The poor people could go screw themselves, starve to death. They're worthless. They're poor people, okay? The aristocrats were all that mattered, okay? The plebeians, meant to be servants. The slaves meant to be slaves. So there's a strong, harsh brutality to ancient Rome. Ancient Rome's not like ancient Greece. Ancient Greece, the aristocrats were something spectacular and new, a sense of freedom in all the world. Don't get me wrong, the Greeks had slaves too, but other places, everybody's a slave pretty much except the ruler and a few tight ones in the inside circle. But ancient Greek is like up here compared to all the other ancient cultures. But Rome was more of a throwback to the East, brutal, collectivist in many ways. Okay, so anyways, Tom Holland is noticing these things as he gets older. There's just sort of a vulgar brutality to Rome. Here is, of course, the torture of Christ. Painting is the flagellation of Christ by William Bouguereau. This guy was a great painter, by the way, in the 1800s. Okay, so let's talk a little more about the book. So it's, subtitle is How Christianity Remade the World. Okay, and I've read a ton of books on Christian history. I'm schooled in it pretty much backwards and forwards. And I can tell you, I think this book is only about 4 out of 10 stars. It's really not worth reading. It's become very popular, and I think the reason it's so popular is because it's wimpy. He says, all these good things about Christianity, but he's always softening it. And the book is kind of crazy book. He just runs through highlights in the history of Christianity, starting from, especially around the ancient Romans and whatnot, and then just skipping to the little historical highlight episodes. So unless you already know Christian history, European history, it might be hard for you to follow the book because it just jumps around. There was no coherent message all through it. And in the end, he kind of comes back to Christianity. He says things to me that are just like stupid. He says, for example, in the modern world, even people who are secular still have Christian values in the West. Like he described the debate on abortion. He says, the people saying abortion is wrong say abortion is murder. The women who saying they should have the right to do whatever they want with their own body, that's still kind of a Christian perspective. And I would say, no, it's not. I mean, you bump off a baby, that's murder, okay? And they call it pro-choice. The baby didn't choose to be bumped off, okay? It was, this reminds me, bumping off the baby, that's like something out of ancient Rome, except ancient Rome would say the weak, should not be allowed to survive. And, Sparta would say the same thing. And so it's a rather brutal thing. And then they chop them up, make them into medication, people eat them. That's cannibalism, okay? Let's be honest what it is. And this is like one of those primitive cultures that sacrifices youth, okay? That's a brutal, bad thing to do, okay? That's not Christian in any way whatsoever. The early Christians, they would go around, where babies were abandoned and try to find them and save them, okay? It was very big on that. It was also in Rome that you could just take a wife and abandon her. You didn't owe her anything. Let her go starve and die. Who cares? Get yourself a new, younger model. But Christianity says, no, you get married and you stay together for life, okay? Christianity really put the women on a pedestal. That's one of the reasons why women flocked to Christianity. It was the best thing that could happen to them in ancient Rome. So those are some things about it. And he will understate things, but you could praise Christianity 1,000 times more than he is. For me, for example, if you look at art, 99.99% of good art was made by Christians, okay? Non-Christian cultures make hardly any art. They're relatively Philistine in comparison with Christianity. There's no comparison, okay? Christianity just generates creativity. It's the greatest motivator of creativity ever in the history of the world by a factor of about 100,000, okay? Don't take my word for it. Look at the Gothic cathedrals. Look at literature. Almost all of the great books are written by Christians, okay? Look at 19 out of the top 20 books, okay? In terms of novels, all right? Look at sculpture, Michelangelo, Bernini, okay? Let's see, what else? Yeah, so I think if you don't already know Christian history, you might be confused by this book because it just keeps jumping around. And he doesn't really connect the scenes that well at all. He just jumps from scene to scene. He didn't have a coherent message. I thought the book was a little bit crazy. The reason it's so popular, it's like a bestseller, is because it's kind of wimpy. People like Christianity, but they don't want it to come on too strong. So it has a little bit of this almost like multicultural aspect. Well, all religions are good, but Christianity did all these extra good things. I don't know how to explain it, but it's wimpy. Okay, that's why he gets interviewed everywhere, because he's wimpy, kind of a lightweight. Much better books. I'll show you the covers for some other much better books. Rodney Stark, he tells the harsh truth the way it is. Same thing with Thomas Woods. This book, what else did it go into? It went into things like talking about the philosophes like Diderot and Voltaire. And they're totally aggressive anti-Christians. They basically destroyed France. And when you have atheism, then there's no checks and balances on the secular boss person, and they often do very terrible things like 50,000 cabezas at the bottom of the guillotine, okay? Not good. All right, look what happened in the 1900s. Atheists in Germany, Russia, and China bumped off more people than were ever bumped off in all the history of all the wars of recorded history of mankind before them. Atheism is what leads to bad behavior, by far, more than anything else, by a factor of 10,000. That's what creates evil, because it says there is no morality. The ruler does whatever they want. Zero checks and balances. Okay, he made the point that Christianity got rid of slavery, and that in much of the world, and Islam and other places, slavery is still widespread. The caste system in India, all that kind of stuff. Sati in India, the widow's being thrown on the funeral pyre for the dead husband. Rather brutal thing that shocked the British. He talked about how Darwin was a big promoter of atheism, and empires would like that, and secular rulers would like that, because then they could say, then we could do whatever we want. There is no God above us, and there's no moral absolutes. What else? He talked about John Lennon, what a jerk John Lennon was, the Beatles singer who wrote the Imagine song, and what a hypocrite jerk he was. I would agree with that. If you don't have a moral foundation You don't have any morals. It's just a fact. And when you don't have any morals, whoever's got the power is going to do whatever they want. And quite often, whoever's got the power, basically what they want is more power. They want a different woman in their bed every night. That's pretty common when, don't get me wrong, a lot of the Roman rulers were good, okay, and especially during the Republic. But you give absolute power and you'll get a lot of bad ones too, okay. Of course, I wrote a book about the history of the West that was much better than this. How the Catholic Church Built Western Civilization by Thomas Woods. That's a great book. Let me show you the Rodney Stark books. Here's some of the Rodney Stark books. The Victory of Reason, How the West Won. And he's not a Christian guy, as Rodney Stark, but his books are really good. He just tells the truth. When you study Christian history, you'll be amazed. All the hospitals came from it. The Renaissance, Scholasticism, the Carolingian Renaissance, the Italian Renaissance, the Victorian Renaissance. Okay, all this stuff just comes from Christianity. The modern scientific method, the hospitals, the charities, the Mary Magdalene centers. Here's another one of the books by this is the guy Rodney Stark. Here's one of his books. So they're much better books. But it's 18 the Dominion book was 18 audio CDs. It gave me something to listen to when I was in the car. So again, I'd only give it 4 out of stars. I would say go to the other places first, but it's okay. Anyways, that's